What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles and Mike Kadlick here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Game Time. Today, we are going to be taking a look at running backs as we continue our position preview series. Mike, you broke this down, put it on the website. Before we get into all the different topics, what do you think about this position group overall?
Yeah, so we did safeties the other day. And as I was writing this and outlining the room, it kind of reminds me of the safety room a little bit, just as far as a guy at the top just got a hefty extension with Kyle Duggar and then Ramondre Stevenson here. And then 3 to 4 other guys who are kind of in the mix. Obviously, Peppers is different on a different scale. But, you got Antonio Gibson, who you signed this offseason to I believe it was a 3-year deal worth like up to $12 million, somewhere in that range. So an affordable running back who we'll get to more in a second. But, he's a guy who I think will play a big role in the offense. And then you have your Kevin Harris, Deshaun Fenwick, and Terrell Jennings. And JaMycal Hasty as well. We can't forget him. He had a really solid camp. We'll get to him later as well. So it's really Ramondre and then the rest of them. And I think Gibson is pretty much a lock to make this team. The other 3, 4 are kind of vying for that third spot, maybe a fourth, depending on how it goes. Kevin Harris, obviously Kevin Harris reminds me of he's like the Josh Bledsoe of the offense, where practice squatter, bring him up sometimes. He's kind of there. Those two came in, I think, around the same year and have kind of lived on the practice squad. So that's kind of my comp for him on the offensive defensive sides. But yeah, it's Ramondre's room, signed his extension this offseason, and he's going to be basically the bell cow and who they're going to try and run the offense through.
Yeah, this is one of the toughest position groups to talk about because, one, just the way the depth chart kind of shapes up. And also, we didn't really get to see them do much of anything. We saw JaMycal Hasty catch passes during OTAs. He did have a couple standout days. We saw Antonio Gibson and, how he's going to factor in with Ramondre Stevenson. But running backs, by nature of their position, can't really do a whole lot when you don't have padded practices. So I feel like especially the guys towards the back of this position group are going to give us a little more to talk about once we actually get to see them really play to their strengths and get into action. But, yeah, without further ado, let's get into sleepers. So who do you think people are not talking enough about from this position?
So I just mentioned him a little bit as far as he was there, one of their top really free agent acquisitions this offseason, but it's Antonio Gibson. And I think, with the deal he signed and kind of how he comes in here, he's the running back 2. We expect him to have a role on the team. I don't think anyone thinks he's going to get cut. I think he's going to make the roster. He's 26. He's a veteran now. But I think we're sleeping on just how much of an impact he's actually going to have in the offense, because not only is he's not just a backup running back to Ramondre Stevenson. He's going to do so much more. He's a very experienced pass catcher. He's a guy who played wide receiver in college. He was also a kick return specialist in college. I think he had 1 kick return touchdown, but he had almost 1,200 yards over 4 seasons. In 4 seasons as a returner. And then as a receiver, he caught 94 passes for 1,700 yards and 23 touchdowns. So he's not just a running back. He has that receiver experience, and he showed that in 4 years in Washington. He ended up kind of getting phased out for Brian Robinson towards the end of his tenure there. But, he was really a dual threat, if you will, for that Washington offense. And I think he's going to bring that here. And I think, we talked about it on our Patriots Beat Patriots Daily crossover Q&A the other day about the kick return game and how how that's going to be impacted by the new rules. And I think Antonio Gibson's someone who we saw him work in with their specialists a little bit in the spring program. I think he can have a real impact there too. So I just think that his versatility, not just as a backup running back, but a guy who can catch passes, be used in that, and then be a kick return specialist too. I think we're really sleeping on the impact he can have on this team.
100%. I think the dual threat part of that is really what people aren't focusing enough on. I think one is a receiver. I think he could do even more than James White was able to do, really just because of his size and his background. Now, with James White, the key was consistency, and you could always rely on him. So I don't necessarily want to make it seem like it's, apples to apples there.
Of course.
But the fact that Gibson can split out, play in the slot, and run an actual route tree as a guy who's almost Ramondre's size. They're both bigger backs. Yep. Very unique skill set, but he's also a good runner. Obviously, he's going to be more the third down back, maybe change of pace, get some touches here and there. But like you said, he got phased out for Brian Robinson, which wasn't anything against Gibson. Brian Robinson's an excellent running back. But when you look at his numbers as a rusher, especially early on in his career, he was still really good, and he fits in this wide zone kind of rushing scheme. So I agree. I think I have him as my sleeper as well, just because the impact that he's going to have and the fact that he's not just a receiver or just a rusher, he can legitimately give you both and add some diversity. I think we're going to see his role kind of be like what the Patriots wanted to do last year with Ezekiel Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson, where you start getting these guys on the field at the same time. And with Elliott, as exciting as the idea of pony personnel is, it's like, oh, 2 running backs, what are you going to do? I think it can be one of the most overhyped things in football, just like, oh, a running back is going to catch passes. But because of Gibson's dynamic skill set, whereas, Zeke we saw it just physically as a runner, he did a lot for this team. But as a receiver, there was only so much he really could do. But I think that what Gibson gives you makes it much more exciting to have maybe him in the slot with Ramondre in the backfield, both in the backfield. You don't know what they're going to do. I think that's really going to be entertaining and fun to watch.
That sort of yin and yang running back combo that, the Cleveland used with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb for the last couple of years, and it was unbelievable. They had some of the best running games in football. That was Alex Van Pelt and Kevin Stefanski's offense. So that's something to get excited about with Ramondre and Gibson for sure.
100%. All right, we got more for you guys, but first, a quick word from our friends over at Game Time. Be right back.
Nothing says summer quite like a live baseball game. And whenever I want to check out a Red Sox game at Fenway, I'm using Game Time, the best place for last-minute deals on tickets. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. With Game Time, it's as easy as finding the game you want to attend, getting a view of the entire stadium to see what prices look like in different areas, and they actually do you a favor and show you both the cheapest tickets available and the best deals. You can also get the view from the seat that you pick, and between their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection, there's really no better option than Game Time. And with Game Time's lowest price guarantee, the app will actually credit you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket elsewhere. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, this is where things get tricky. Like you said, it's kind of like the safety position, but we're going to take the best swing we possibly can. Who do you have as a surprise cut among the Patriots running backs?
Yeah, so we just talked about receiving backs and that impact you can have. My surprise cut here is a receiving back, and it's JaMycal Hasty. And right now, I consider him RB3. I think he sort of, over the spring program, established himself as that guy. But he really established himself as that guy because basically OTAs is a passing camp, and you're not really running the football all that much. Like, you can't really develop run plays. You can't see it really happen. It's basically walk through whenever you run the football because it just doesn't, you can't block it up like you would in a game because there's no pads. You're not really banging around. So Hasty shined because that's been his MO as a receiving back in the NFL. Him and Jacoby Brissett showed a great rapport. I think there was a day where Hasty had a couple touchdowns. He showed off his speed. He showed off his hands. Like, he looked really good. So I think we got, high on him this spring. And I think once sort of you realize that, okay, we don't really know how he is as a runner yet. He didn't really play much for the Patriots at all last season. If one of the young guys in Fenwick or Jennings or even Kevin Harris can have a good camp, they might sort of opt to keep some more of a burly bulldozer running back instead of a guy who can just catch passes, especially when you have Antonio Gibson, who is really going to take over that receiving back role. So right now, if I had to guess on July 3rd, and we'll get to the roster projection, I think Hasty will make the team, but it also wouldn't shock me at all if he sort of gets phased out once we get down to business and sort of need to get, your banging running backs down there.
Yeah, I agree. Like, on my roster projection, I did have JaMycal Hasty, and it's kind of default because, like you said, he's the only one. I mean, his impact was greater than what we saw from Stevenson and Gibson. And again, that's not really against them. It's just kind of how things went with the way that the script was in practice and who actually got opportunities. And Hasty is someone who was on the roster last year. We saw him actually make an impact on special teams. That was really where he got all his playing time. It sounded like he had trouble picking up the pass protection schemes, and that's why he didn't actually get playing time. Anytime we asked about him, Bill would kind of be like, yeah, it's tough, when a running back comes in and they have to pick all that up. And it's like, oh, okay, that's why he's probably not playing.
Yeah, right.
But I do believe he's, a willing pass blocker. We'll see when these guys can separate themselves. I'll talk more about some guys that I think actually do have a chance to make the roster. Because if I'm being totally honest, just based on skill set, I could see Hasty, not being on the roster. He's already been in the league a few years. It makes sense. But given what we know about the group right now, I would agree he has to be the surprise cut because Ramondre ain't going anywhere and Antonio Gibson is not going anywhere. Both guys have got fresh new contracts.
Well, that's why, and I was reading back through some of these that I did last offseason, and some rooms it made a little bit more sense to have like a trade candidate surprise cut. Like I'm working on specialists later in the week, but there is a lot of cop-outs here. Like, again, Hasty is it really a surprise if JaMychal Hasty gets cut? Not really. Like, I think he'll make the team, so that's kind of why I did it there. We'll get into it with trade candidates in a second, but sometimes it's just difficult to, it's like you're putting a square peg in a round hole here. So,
yeah. Well, you talk about trade candidates, so give it to me. Who do you have potentially being dealt away from the Patriots? Drum roll, please.
None. There's nobody. You can't do it. It's like the safeties the other day. There really is no trade candidate here in the room. You can't even make one up because, again, you just look through the roster. You're not going to trade Ramondre Stevenson after just extending him. You're not going to trade Antonio Gibson after just giving him a 3-year deal. And the rest of the room doesn't have any trade value. You're not going to get anything for JaMychal Hasty unless I shouldn't even say that because you're not going to get anything for him. And then the two undrafted rookies, it just doesn't make sense. So, if anything, you should look to maybe trade for a running back. You could still use some, backup potential there. If you don't like what you see in Kevin Harris throughout the first couple weeks, if you don't like what you see in the undrafted rookies over the first couple weeks, again, I don't know who's going to be available, but it would make a lot more sense to see this team trade for a running back on the open market to give themselves even more depth of the position than it would be to see them trade any of these guys. So sometimes you can squeeze one in. You can squeeze in a JaMychal Hasty as a surprise cut, but in this room, there's not even someone you could talk about as a trade candidate, I don't think.
Yeah, and with a position like running back where there isn't a lot of value around the league, everybody thinks that running backs are replaceable. So you're going to have a very hard time getting any value trying to trade somebody who doesn't have a real track record of success in the league. Right. So let's just wrap this one up. Not going to try to add too much filler into this one. Give me your grade and your projection for what this position looks like as it currently stands.
Yeah. So right now I'm keeping just 3 guys in Antonio Gibson, JaMychal Hasty, and of course, Ramondre Stevenson. And on the outside looking in, Deshaun Fenwick, Kevin Harris, Terrell Jennings. I think Kevin Harris would be the next guy in. I feel like if you're doing it, I talked about this with, Barth, I think on one of our shows last week on Patriots Daily, where if you think about it like March Madness and kind of like, your first 4 in, last 4 out, I think Kevin Harris would be one of the last people out. Like he's right on the fringe there. You might want to keep him. But at the end of the day, I mentioned him as the Josh Bledsoe of the offense. He's probably not going to get picked up on waivers. You're probably going to, be able to get him back on the practice squad, unless, of course, he thinks he has other options in the league. And, we talked about it with like JJ Taylor last year was one of those guys where he was a candidate, but he wanted to see what he had elsewhere. He never returned. So ultimately, I think it's 3 guys, Kevin Harris and maybe one of the other 2 in Fenwick and Jennings, come back on practice squad. As far as the grade, I'm giving them a B-. I think the room is top heavy with Ramondre. We'll see what Gibson has. I'm bullish on him. I think he's going to be successful. I think it makes a lot of sense in the room. But beyond that, don't know what you have in Hasty. Don't know what you have in what you have in Kevin Harris, and it hasn't been spectacular. And then you're working with 2 undrafted free agents. So it's a room that could still improve. But when you have Ramondre Stevenson, a guy who, in my opinion, is a fringe 10 running back, just got paid like one, and is going to shine in this run-heavy offense with Alex Van Pelt, you can't give him a C. I think B- makes a ton of sense. You could maybe even go B, but to me, I think I'm giving the room a B-.
I think that's fair. So I have the same roster projection at the position. I got, obviously, Mondre, Gibson, then JaMychal Hasty. But I will say my dark horse is Deshaun Fenwick. He was someone who, during the pre-draft process, I kind of looked into him briefly. I'm kicking myself that I didn't post any clips of him because it would have been great to be able to refer to. But watching him, I was just like, yeah, this dude's solid. Like, he's a well-rounded player. He's a disciplined runner. Honestly, he's got some overlap with Kevin Harris in terms of like they can catch passes, they can pass block. They're, no nonsense runners. We're really like one cut and go. They're not going to lose yards. They'll get what's there and then maybe 1 or 2 extra because they're so physical. I also think that Fenwick has good vision, but unlike Harris, who had a lot of mileage on because he got a lot of carries out of South Carolina. Also, I believe he had a pretty significant injury that he was coming off of once he got to the NFL. Fenwick is an older guy. I think he's like 23 or something like that. Maybe 24. Right. That might be. I know he's an older guy, but he doesn't have a ton of mileage, actually. He didn't get a ton of work at Oregon State. So unlike Harris, he may be giving you a little bit more juice. And I also do think, like, just in terms of play style, he's got a bit more explosiveness, nothing crazy, but, a little more to work with there. So I really like Deshaun Fenwick. Also, really affordable guy. Kevin Harris probably is going to end up back on the practice squad just because that's where he's been for so long. Right. Unless he decides, like what we saw last year, a lot of guys who had been on the practice squad for a while were like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go see if I can get, more work elsewhere. So I think that's very fair. And in terms of grade, I gave him a straight B.
Okay.
Mondre Stevenson, I think, is a top 10 running back in the NFL. Antonio Gibson is one of the best receiving backs in the NFL when you look at statistically. I kind of like what you have on the younger side with guys who can at least just be solid complements. Obviously, you'd love to have a great RB3, but at the end of the day, because it's a position where you can pretty easily find somebody to kind of come in, even if it's mid-season. Like, it's one of the few positions where a rookie can come in and there's very little learning curve because there's so much carryover. Really depends more on the offensive line. So I think it is a solid position group. Like you said, top heavy, but there's not a whole lot of running back rooms in the NFL where they're 3 deep with guys who really do scare you. So
exactly.
I can't give them an A necessarily because they don't have that, but I feel like, B range is pretty fair.
Yeah, and it's a room that you have to get excited about. We've heard Ramondre talk about it, but we also heard Alex Van Pelt say it. They want to run the football. They want to give these guys the ball. They want to let them, sort of be the center of the offense. And so when you have a guy like Stevenson who, 3 years in, just gets extended, coming off an injury, but a guy who I think is really going to be the focal point of the offense. It's something to be excited about. I think they're going to really they're going to show their stuff, and I really like what they have in Antonio Gibson. So that B- can easily bring itself up to even a B+ in my opinion. So it's just a lot of potential that you want to see happen again with this new scheme coming in.
Yes, sir. All right. Before we sign off, we already kind of touched on it, but let people know which position preview we've got coming up next.
Yeah, we're going with the specialists. This was a room in the Patriots that was always filled with guys who, Jordan Healig and Matthew Slater, Brendan Schooler, Cody Davis, all those guys. And now it's kind of dwindled down to punters and kickers and one specialist in Brendan Schooler and a couple guys who are kind of fringe, but play other positions. So want to take a look at that. We'll talk about the kicker dilemma and all that stuff. So that's going to be up on the website Friday, and we're going to record it and have it on Patriots Press Pass Friday as well. So you can go and check that out.
Yeah, special teams actually matter now. I understood where, they were kind of devalued because no one was returning kicks. Now you kind of have to, unless you're willing to give the other team the ball. Was it the 30, 35-yard line?
Yeah, 35.
Like, you're giving up significant yardage. So I've seen sometimes in the comments, people are like, oh, special teams don't matter. They may matter more now than they have in a very long time. So that's going to be a fun one. Watch out for it. But until then, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.